Okay, thanks. Now, if you could share your screen, please. Okay, awesome. Next slide, please. We do have a little housekeeping to do before we get rolling. First of all, this is a public meeting. As you heard from our little computer voice there, that this meeting is recorded and the recording will serve as the meeting minutes. So it will be posted on the ODF website. I do request that when you're not speaking, if you could leave your mic on mute, just so that we don't have too many extra noises going on. And if you have a question or a comment, we do ask that you hold those until the end of each topic presentation today. If you've got something that you would like to share, ask about, discuss, please feel free to use the raise hand feature so that we're not talking on top of each other. I do want to bring up that there is going to be some training upcoming and it's going to be online. This is about ethics and public meetings. We are waiting for DAS to get some computer work in place, but we will, so that we can give you access to the accounts. They're real quick and probably about an hour, but we will be sending out an email about that once that becomes available and we can get you set up in the system. So for those of you who are serving on other committees where you've discussed these topics, we are 100% aware of this. We're just waiting for some computer things to make it available to you. So that is where we are with that. And if you could move on to the next slide, please, Emily. Okay, so we're going to, our initial agenda said program updates, kind of our whole meeting.
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt. I just want to let you know, I got a text from somebody that said that they were trying to get in and there was a Teams meeting that they had received a invite for this meeting.
The Zoom link is in the meeting invite, so they may need to double click that in their calendar and click on the Zoom link that's in the email that comes
Thanks,
up.
Seth.
So,
it's Megan. I got on since you sent me the Zoom link. I appreciate it.
yeah, I just want to make sure there's not other people stuck in a Teams invite somewhere if a Teams invite got inadvertently sent out.
Okay, I appreciate that, Seth. We're keeping an eye on Teams because when people log in, we can see that a window pops up and we haven't seen anybody else log in to Teams.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you for pointing that out. So real quick look at the agenda today. This whole meeting is a compliance monitoring update. So while the initial agenda said that, we took it off the list. We will be taking attendance as we usually do. Then John Hawksworth is going to talk about where things are with the reforestation study, working with the statistician and so on, and we'll open that up for questions, discussion, feedback, anything you might have to say about that. After that, Rebecca McCown is going to talk about the rule selection for the monitoring program redesign and give us an update on that process and where we stand there. And then we're going to take a quick break and then come back and go over the CMPC charter draft that we sent out to you and get feedback and input on that so that we can refine that and work on having a working charter. Next slide, please. So first up is John Hawksworth. If you could please hold your questions until the end of the presentation, and he's here to talk about the reforestation study.
Well, thank you, Kate. This should be a pretty brief sort of a study update. Last time I gave you a pretty detailed description of what we did with the pilot study. But if we can get off the splash screen now onto the next slide, we'll take a look at the subject areas. Going to give you a quick update on what we've done with the statistician, responses to comments on the draft reforestation report, the key decisions that we've come up with, and then the next steps. Next slide, please. As far as the statistician update, we have contracted with Mount Hood Environmental, and some of you may recognize that as the outfit that did the review on our 2013 to 2017 work. And they assembled a team that was pretty strong in terms of having field experience. which we considered very important for us to have because we wanted people who would come up with solutions for us that could be readily applied in the field rather than just having a theoretical basis. So this has been real valuable to have this so that they can suggest things, ways that are more efficient of handling the things that we're dealing with in the field. To date, we have on May 8th, we received 2 deliverables. One was a statistical review of the draft pilot report, the same one that you all looked at. And that one dealt with, well, it dealt with many things, but the comments primarily had to do with stylistic elements and points of clarification rather than any statistical flaws. And then the second deliverable was a review of the draft field protocol, and that has proven to be very valuable in the terms of the insights it's given us on more efficient ways to deal with things that will satisfy statistical concerns while still streamlining what we did on the pilot, because the pilot was pretty intensive on labor. And the future studies we're going to do are going to either be intensive on labor or money, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So anything that you can do to streamline that and make that less intensive is good. And we are working with Mount Hood Environmental to finalize this protocol with specific statistical methods. You can go to the next slide, please. Now, we didn't receive many comments from this committee in writing, but they did address a couple of themes that I wanted to bring up. First of all, there was a concern raised because we'd mentioned having dates, having our permission slips had dates of which ideally it would have been when the operation was completed. Some people actually filled in their planting dates. And a person did express concern that we were using these reported planting dates as indicators of whether things occurred on time. And we based our compliance determinations on field data. We do collect the supporting data that serves as supporting information, things that we can use to corroborate in case one of our assumptions is strange. And if someone reports something that's quite a bit different from what we think it is, and that gives us this yellow flag that, hey, we better find out what there is to resolve this discrepancy. So we find this sort of information important, but we used field data exclusively for compliance determination. The second, there were a couple points that were raised about our handling of non-response, and one had to do with the concern about potential bias. And we randomly prioritized all of our sites we looked at, and we drew an oversample. So there were going to be some sites that we were not going to look at unless the ones previously on the prioritized randomized list, unless we did not get permission for those. Since we did get permission for all of the top ones, it was not necessary any longer to look for permission on the ones we weren't going to survey anyways. So there actually was not an issue with bias with non-response. As a note, Mount Hood Environmental, in their review of what we did there, the protocol, they recommended that sections on non-response be largely, be curtailed. I won't say dropped because you have to mention that there was no non-response. But a lot of the discussion I had in there in the draft report was irrelevant from their perspective because there was no non-response to be dealt with. So some of these things that were commented on may not actually end up in the finalized report. The second question that had to do with non-response was, well, did we come up with new insights that could be used to handle non-response? And we have, since 2013, we've been trying to figure out ways of trying to deal with non-response, never achieved the response levels we wanted. I'm afraid we did not arrive at any silver bullets that we can report in our finalized report. We do have some social scientific firepower that we didn't have at the time, so we may be able to be more successful with the things we tried in the past. try new innovations on that. And also we are looking into opportunities for going out to and working with stewardship foresters in a way that does not compromise the independence of our two facets of working with ODF, that they're in enforcement, we're in something else, but still working with them to facilitate the permission process. And of course, any insights that the CMP can offer regarding methods to improve response will be appreciated, because we will be dealing with a larger group of people on the next go round. In particular, I know a couple landowner groups are represented by this committee, so insights can be offered there on ways that can make things more palatable from a landowner perspective are good. And another note I have, because I don't have a slide for this, but I've come up with some biodegradable flagging that's supposed to have a life to 6 months to 24 months. And I did want some feedback from landowner groups on whether that would be an acceptable time period to have stuff out there marking things. Finally, the last question had to do with measures of effort versus success, and it had to deal, I mentioned that things like herbivory and landslides covering seedlings, that sort of thing could make our count smaller. And the person expressed, well, is this an issue in the first place because they're not going to succeed? And I did want to emphasize that the planning survey we did in the pilot was a measure of effort. So we do want to know what the landowner tried. Of course, we can only report what we can see, but we can note, as the pilot was supposed to point out potential obstacles or weaknesses that we could work on. Point out that this would be a low estimate of the stocking out there, because there's likely things that are not seen. And that was the best we could do under that circumstance. Now we are actually looking at doing a free to grow study, which would be a measure of success. Do these trees that were planted actually achieve free to grow at the stocking levels which the rule specifies? And we're actually leaning towards that in this upcoming study. Going with that, and maybe having a timeliness of planning as a quick yes, no to the satisfaction of the surveyor. Planning was attempted here, which would end up requiring a larger sample size overall to do the two separate aspects. We haven't completely firmed that up, but any ideas you have on that sort of thing will be useful. Could we go to the next slide, please? As far as key decisions, we have one major key decision that happened, and that's that our upcoming survey will be performed in-house rather than by contractors. And we had a couple of reasons for that, and there are probably more that Adam had, but in the choice. But the two that stood out to me were this would be a valuable training opportunity. We've actually drawn a number of new people in from all walks of life, so a pretty diverse staff here. And this would be an opportunity for people who may work on computers, as many of us do in Salem. Our jobs are largely office-based. It can go out there, get an idea of what these things actually look like in real life on the ground that you work with on computers. And actually some of the obstacles kind of work together with our diverse backgrounds towards a common objective, and have an idea both of the field aspect and of the in-office aspect, and hopefully come up with integrated solutions to improving our processes. So that was the first issue. And of course, the access considerations. In the past, we have had people express concerns about having contractors accessing their land that are greater. Sometimes there are concerns about ODF accessing the land, but there seem to be additional concerns that have to deal with contractors sometimes. So we did feel that we might be able to have easier access, allay some of these considerations if ODF personnel were doing this. Could we go to the next slide, please? So our next steps are, well, deciding what type of study we're performing. And I think I've said that actually it looks like we're leaning, things aren't set in stone, but we're leaning towards the free to grow study as being our quantitative study of what's out there, and the planning being a yes, no sort of study that's a more brief one. We do hope to finalize, the contractor, the statistician is contracted to finalize the study protocol by June 2023. And this will be the result of a back and forth. As I say, they've given us a draft and I've responded some to that, and they'll give us further a further more specific draft at the end of the month. And then in the middle of June, we're supposed to have this finalized protocol to run with. We'll then get to working on obtaining access to various properties. And we're still hoping to start conducting field studies in September. And then when this is all done with and analyzed, we're hoping to apply our lessons learned to future monitoring, including the stuff that Rebecca will be discussing with you soon. All these lessons we gather gradually, and we try to use them to avoid repeating the same mistakes sometimes to on future projects or improving the process. And with that, we'll go to questions or discussion.
John, real quick, could you explain the difference between a planting study and a free to grow study and what we'd be looking at?
Well, with the planting study, we had basically the rule that after the end of harvest, planting needs to be completed within 2 years. And beyond that, then there's the question, well, how do you know that planting's achieved? And we relied on guidance on the pilot, which said, well, if you're planting to the levels that you're eventually going to need for this free to grow period, which I'll define in a second here, then it's considered sufficient planting. And that is guidance there, those numbers, for at least at the planting level. So free to grow is at the end of 6 years after a completion of the harvest. You're supposed to have achieved this this state where the forest is there. You can see it. It's not lost under weeds and all that because it's free to grow. It's supposed to have enough of a head start, so to speak, on competing vegetation that it's pretty obvious that these trees will grow up into a stand rather than being outcompeted. And I see Seth has may have a clarification he wants on that.
It looks like Amanda raised her hand first.
Okay.
And
fine.
then Seth, then Stephen. So
I have something sort of tangential to this conversation. So Seth or Fitz, if you have something more direct to what John just mentioned, I'll let you guys go first.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. I do have something very applicable to free to grow. So given that you're going to have, it sounds like some office people or new people that are typically stuck to a desk, do this analysis in the field, and it's a free to grow call. I'm just curious what your protocols are, and if you are, I mean, it seems like it would be helpful to have somebody with a little bit of silvicultural background because there is some subjectivity into what is quote unquote free to grow, and what is, like, as you said, lost in the weeds. So could you speak to that at all, John? And maybe that's too far in the weeds, and it will be, so to speak, no pun intended, and it'll come out in your June study protocol, but just curious what your thoughts are there.
Well, the initial comment is that your comment is valid and is on our radar, in that when we were hashing this out, I actually noted that someone better than myself at that would need to train our people on free to grow. And the Mount Hood people last night, same thing. They said, well, make sure you have an ironclad definition of what free to grow is, because they've had trouble in Washington and stuff like that with that definition. So it's very much on the radar, and I do know that we use some criteria in the pilot, which I think you for one questioned, because they didn't necessarily all of them come directly from the rules, but then the rules leave some judgment calls there. So that's something I certainly wouldn't mind working with people on, coming up with a firm set of criteria that we're going to use for the free to grow. And right now we don't have anything, a firm protocol from Mount Hood.
And I would encourage you to maybe even reach out to some foresters and have that discussion with them. And I would go beyond just I might get in trouble for saying this, but I would go beyond just the industry foresters. And the reason is because, there's different levels of what is free to grow. Free to grow is not necessarily weed free, right? And so you take some companies are really trying to maximize tree growth, and so they do a fantastic job of making sure that the trees really have that major head start. And others, and I know it's primarily in the small landowner community, are a little bit more basically they don't mind a little bit of more weeds in there, and but at the same time, making sure they want to make sure the trees are up. So there's definitely a gradient. It's not a one size fits all definition for free to grow, and it definitely doesn't mean there's no competition. It just means that it's free, that it's going to out compete that competition. So anyway, might be useful to have a small group of foresters and maybe even the regional forest practices committees. Now that I think about it, that's probably a good smattering of land ownership types and sizes and interests that could help you with that.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
That's a great suggestion, Seth, and I'm actually going to be at the RFPC meeting next week, and I'll see what I can do on that end once we've had some internal discussion. Adam is out today. He's in training this week, so.
Could I tag on to that last
Yeah,
comment?
absolutely.
Is that okay, Amanda? So I was out doing this yesterday on a research project I have, and I would echo what Seth said. So for example, some of it is subjective based on the vegetation right around ceilings. So yesterday I was out, I had some trees that after 3 years in the ground were above my head, and the vegetation around it was lower, definitely free to grow. The tree was vigorous. Yet I had that same size and vigor tree in a bunch of vine maple. And even though I think it'll win eventually, I could not say that it was free to grow. And so there is some subjectivity to where that seedling is. Likewise, I've had seedlings that were maybe my height in areas where it's more herbaceous, it's vigorous, I would call it free to grow. Yes, there's other plants out there. And so, I could offer up this site as a training site here, but anyway, I just wanted to echo what Seth said. My other question relates to plots, and I'll defer that to later.
Yeah. Amanda, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, my question is very different than this line of thought. So David, if you've got something, I'll let you go.
Thanks. It was just sort of a quick comment. Kind of, Rebecca has put in the chat. We do have experienced monitoring staff that we training the whole team, and I also want to echo the validity of the comments that Seth and Stephen made. Those are absolutely correct. That it's a very technical skill, but I kind of want to push back against the idea that we hired a bunch of desk people. All of our new hires have significant field research experience in forestry. So we're not completely helpless, though we will be relying on those that have much more expertise than we do.
Yeah, I apologize, David. I did not mean to imply that no one had field experience in anything, but it's as contrasted with what ODF once upon a time, when everyone was a forester by trade, then it's less so now. And
No, yeah, no offense taken. I just wanted to clarify for those who didn't know our backgrounds as much.
Okay, if we're moving to a next question, we had a couple more people. Amanda, you've been waiting very patiently, if you wouldn't mind, unless you have something to add, Seth, to this conversation.
Nope, go ahead, Amanda.
Okay, yeah, so my question is a little bit more high level. So I guess I would really like to see if we have like if we have any sort of like strategic plan or planning document that outlines kind of what we're focused on now, what we're going to be focusing on next. Because I guess I didn't know that the planting survey and that research and that monitoring was going to feed into Free to Grow. Maybe that was told to us and I didn't know that, or when that decision was made. But I guess at a high level, I guess going back over kind of where we're at, where we're going, I guess that would be nice, or if that document exists somewhere and I just haven't looked at it. I know we're going to go over the charter, but that's like even higher level than that. Not really like a kind of planning document. So Kate, can you just kind of respond to that?
Sure. This discussion is actually based on the conversations we've been having with MHE, some of which have been fairly recently before this meeting. And they have been suggesting that Free to Grow would be a better measure. So it's more going back to John's presentation here about whether we're looking at effort or whether we're looking at success. And they have suggested that success might be a better thing to look at, because that in turn might influence our technical guidance. We want to make sure that the information that we're giving out is the best we can give. And so that's an opportunity for us to identify gaps internally that we can address, which is one of the purposes of the compliance monitoring program. As we get more of this hammered out with MHE and we've gotten more figured out, as far as what this next phase of the study is going to look like. This first one, the pilot study, where we were testing our approach, testing our methods, really using it as a trial balloon before we start scaling up into this full scale compliance monitoring program. Then things are going to morph, but we will be keeping everybody in the loop as we have more and better information. At this point, we're batting ideas around to see what we think would give us the best possible information to make good decisions. Because it's one thing to come back and say, yeah, everybody did great, but if we can find gaps in our own processes, that helps us to help landowners make the best decision through good technical guidance.
And Kate, can I add to that?
Yes, please.
Okay, so it really came down to the statisticians pointing out that looking at trees after 2 years of planting didn't actually address the compliance question, because the rule is free to grow. It isn't after 2 years. So to be technically, assessing compliance, we had to look at free to grow. So that was the biggest issue. 2 years, did they plant or did they not plant? You can answer that, but you can't answer the compliance question of did they plant to free to grow? So at that density. So that's really, it came down to addressing the compliance question. And then with regards to the next step, that's what I'll be covering in my presentation.
Okay.
But one of the squashy spots that we have is that technical guidance says, plant n number of trees. Rule says free to grow. And so, in the compliance monitoring program, ODF doesn't enforce technical guidance. Those are best management practices. So we need to make sure that we are asking questions that point directly to the rules and compliance with the rules, which in turn can help us identify areas where we might need further education and outreach.
Okay, so just
I think that's great. I just want to clarify that it is a rule to plant a certain density stock. Like there is an actual forest practices rule that says that trees have to be planted at a certain density by year 2. And my understanding was that was what you were trying to accomplish. And so you actually can say that you achieved compliance to that rule through the first. So I'm not disputing whether you go to free to grow. I'm just saying
Yeah.
that your answer technically is not completely correct because there is a rule that actually says you have to plant to a certain density.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, and I guess just to close the loop on the question that I had, I agree with Seth completely. And so free to grow would just expand kind of what we're looking at for compliance and trying to really close the loop on the entirety of the question around compliance with reforestation regulations, right? And kind of the
Exactly.
regulations that we're interested in. Now, kind of following that, you know, it sounds like we might get a little bit of this later today, but you know, the idea of, are we asking the right questions? Are we looking for compliance on the right things? And so, yes, we're fully inundated with the reforestation conversation, but you know, now that this program is getting more formalized and got more formalized through the PFA, kind of where we go from here. And again, maybe that's part of the charter and further conversation, but anyways, just wanted to put that on the record.
Yeah, and that's something that Rebecca will be discussing next. We are going to need to move along real quick here, and I've got Seth, Casey, and Megan with hands up, and if we could go in that order, please, just because that's the order on my screen, that would be great.
Sorry, I'll lower my
Steven.
hand. It was a legacy hand.
Legacy hand. Okay, Stephen, I know that you had earlier mentioned that you had another question. Why don't we go there and then we'll go to Casey and Megan, but we do need to wrap this up real quick. And if there are things that we can't immediately address, we can always send out an email to the group.
Okay, it just, I was reading the report and, you know, I know that there was a tremendous amount of effort in plots, and I know that you were looking at kind of 1 plot per 2 acres, particularly as you get up to that 120 acre. And I guess, given that effort and moving forward, whether on those larger units really going to that much of a plot density, I know you can't, we're not going to answer that questions, but I just, I wonder if you could come up with a scaled back just for your own cost but still make it statistically valid, scale back the number of plots. And maybe instead of doing a grid, you could do it random, where you actually navigate to a certain number of randomly located plots within a harvest unit. So that's just a comment, but your statistician would probably need to work on that for you.
And that is a conversation we're having with MHE right now. Casey?
I think Megan was before me. Just
I was after you.
Go ahead.
oh, okay, that's great. First, thanks. Second, I have a series of questions, but really one of the practical ones for John is can you just put a GIS pin on these plot locations? If we're not going to have QA QC, you know, it seems like an important part of it. So having a pin seems like a reasonable thing. I wanted to kind of back up some of the comments on the free to grow. It was concerning to me to hear that free to grow was a yes or no in that simple point, which is what I believe I heard from John. I hope that we can see a protocol for identifying things that are free to grow that we can comment on. The last thing that in our short time here is I would love to see the data that backs up the parts of the, sorry, I'm distracted by David comment in the chat. I'd love to see the actual data that goes into this pilot study's conclusions. Things like the plot, inner plot intra-stand variability in the compliance results would be really helpful to hear and see. And the last thing I guess would be, I'm curious why there's a self-identified private industrial, but also self-identified small landowner as one of the 37. And somebody can just put that in the chat for me. Thank you.
Okay, John, if you could drop that in chat. And Casey, these are things that we will be addressing. We're not just gonna go out willy-nilly and not have a protocol, but we do have to develop it first before we can share it. Megan,
Can you talk more about your current contract with MHE, the timeline for compliance monitoring for Free to Grow, and how that fits into the long-term requirements and expectations of PFA compliance monitoring?
I can address this briefly and then I may kick it further to John or Rebecca, just because they've been working more closely with this. But we're in the process of standing up the formal program that was developed under the PFA rules. But until one of the keys of that is that we have to receive a notification of completion before we can go out and monitor those sites. So we're doing some interim work in order to basically keep going and to test our methods on a smaller scale right now, so that when we're looking at the larger rule selection, which Rebecca is going to be talking about here in a moment, that we've worked out some of the kinks so that we're not working on this big giant thing and having to backtrack and fix mistakes. It's easier to work out those issues on the smaller scale than it is, in the larger program. So that's part of the reason that we're doing this study now, is so that we've got, I would say, our systems dialed in.
So, and I can add
By
to
the time
that.
we go out there, Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind, yeah.
So our contract with MHE has two parts. One is this reforestation interim part. And then the second part of the contract is the long-term compliance monitoring. So what we're following up right now is with we did the pilot reforestation study. So now we're doing a full reforestation study with the existing rules as they are now. So we don't have, they don't have to notify of completion. So that until the rules go into effect and we have a year's worth of data, we're doing the reforestation study and developing the new program. So what I'm going to be talking about next is under the new rules, the new private forest accord adopted rules. So hopefully that helps. The reforestation is the interim before we go into the larger scale long-term efforts. Does that help?
It does.
Okay.
Thank you.
And this is actually a perfect segue. Emily, if you could move on to the next slide, please. And if you have any further questions about the monitoring study, if you could please email the compliance monitoring at odf.oregon.gov email, and we can address those to the entire group. So if you send in a question to us on your lonesome, we will send it out to the entire committee so that everybody has that information and is part of the conversation. Rebecca, take it away.
Thank you. As many of you know, my name is Rebecca McCown, and I'm the riparian and aquatic specialist in the monitoring unit of the Forest Resource Division. So I work with the compliance monitoring and also am the lead on the TMDL efforts with DEQ. Next slide. So the topics I'm going to go over today are, again, just recapping the compliance monitoring rules as they were stated in the PFA report and adopted into rule that go into effect January 1, 2024. I'm going to kind of outline the initial rule review process, the questions we were asking. I'll give you some examples of this process that we're going through. And then I'll also go over the process of the other variables we are considering, and then go to the next steps of after this process, what we plan to do next. So next slide. So as you know, this is a rule that goes into effect January 1, 2024. It's the rule group priorities for compliance, which again were specifically stated in the private forest accord report, that part of the HCP related to biological and aquatic resources, we are to prioritize Division 625 Forest Road Construction and Maintenance, Division 630 Harvesting. Now I do want to note that the current rules that are out just says Division 630 Harvesting, but as part of the spring cleanup, it was a technical issue where we actually had harvesting on steep slopes, and the steep slopes part got dropped. So we are asking that the ODF Board of Forestry update that this June and put back the steep slopes, because it was specific in the private forest accord report. And then also Division 643, water protection rules, vegetation along streams. So those are the 3 that we are prioritizing, but we also note that the Board of Forestry may direct us to look include other rules as well. So these are the priority groups that we will be looking at for the long-term study, rule divisions. Next slide. Okay, so what we are doing here is what we took. Okay, first we started out with the water protection rules and the road rules. We haven't started the steep slope rules in terms of combing through all of those until we get additional training, because that is all new. And we want to get trained up on steep slopes before we start kind of combing through those rules. So we took each of the water protection rules and road rules, so each rule and subsection rule, and we made it into a question. We took those rules into question and we said, okay, is this measurable? Is this rule measurable? Like, can we take a metric? What is it assessed and past ODF monitoring efforts? So we actually have documentation in the past of why rules were or were not included in compliance monitoring. So we kind of looked at those rules or those comments and added them to rules that were similar, just again to give us some background of what issues they may have had in the past. We also looked at other states, what they are including in compliance monitoring efforts, particularly Washington. So if we found a rule that is similar to a rule that the state of Washington has used, we noted that under that rule, so that it gives us context when we're looking at that rule for compliance or considering it to put into the compliance study. We also looked at past issues with compliance and civil penalties. So we reached out to civil penalties. They gave us all the historic reports of rules that have civil penalties, and the ones that had issues, we definitely documented that in under that particular rule, saying, hey, this something to consider. So now I can actually give you some examples. Now there's a lot of rules and subdivisions of the rules, so you can imagine we're fine-tooth combing this. So if you want to go to the next slide. So here's an example. Again, this is the rule OAR. So again, it's not going to go into effect for everybody until January 1, 2024, but for large landowners, this will go effect July 1, 2023. So we took this rule and we said, okay, made it a question. Within the riparian management area, did the operator retain all down wood and snags that are not safety or fire hazards and leave all snags felled from safety or fire hazard reasons? Were they were they felled for stream improvement projects? So looking at this rule, we put it out to the staff, and one comment was, well, down wood retention would be difficult to estimate since it's hard to argue for absence unless you have large signs of disturbance. So remember, when we do rule compliance, we're looking at this usually a year or so, year and a half or so after the fact. So determining, what was left could be difficult, because we didn't know what they had to start with. Another comment was, well, has habitat value, but as stated above, difficult to measure. So it's not that this rule is off the table. It just will be, what is the standard of, did they retain all? Like, what is all? What did they start with? We don't know, that kind of thing. So this is one example. Can the next slide, please? So here's a road rule that we, again, made it a question. Are all active, inactive, and vacated roads and landings within the operation hydrologically disconnected to the maximum extent practicable for waters of the state to minimize sediment delivery? So again, one of the questions was, well, how do we measure maximum extent practicable? With rules like this, we kind of see this as more of a stewardship forester rule to address when they're out there during, pre-operation, active operation, and post-operation. This is one where they'll kind of have a better idea of the operation area. They'll be working with the landowners on their written plans. And so they have a better idea of maximum extent possible than if we, as the compliance monitoring unit, did this. Now, it's not impossible. Like, we could look at the written plans. We could look at the stewardship forester notes and see if we can determine that, But again, all that additional research would take a lot of time for each landowner that had this type of activity occur. So again, we're not, saying we're not going to measure this rule, but we do see it as a rule that's more applicable to stewardship foresters implementing and making sure that the landowners are doing it to the maximum extent possible. They have more background. Another example, if you can move to the next slide. So this is standard practice for vegetation retention prescription for type F and type SSBT streams. The operator retain all trees and vegetation with the distances from the edge of the active channel. This is a rule that's very similar to one that Washington DNR, Department of Natural Resource, has on their compliance monitoring questions. It actually had several that were very similar to this. We had staff comments note this is very reasonable to measure. Another staff said high ecosystem value for stream shading, erosion control, amphibian habitat, future wood recruitment and filtration. So this is definitely a strong contender to be included into the compliance monitoring for this vegetation retention or water protection rules. Okay, next slide. So additional items that we're looking at for, I think there's one missing. Could you go back one? Emily? Oh, it looks like a slide might be missing. Okay, go forward and let's see. One more. I'm just going to see if it's there. Okay, I'm going to go over the slide even though it's not up. It's on process. So it looks like it must have been cut. I know you guys were adding these. Okay, so an additional effort that we're going to do is we're having multiple reviewers, just so you know. So we have monitoring unit staff, ODF stewardship foresters, training staff, and the wildlife biologists, all looking at these, like I said, each rule and subsection are turned into questions. We have comments and we have many eyes on them providing feedback. Another note is that we're looking at cost effectiveness, reflecting on past costs for compliance monitoring field methods and potential costs for assessing new rules. So that is a component we're considering. But what is very important to note is that the study design and field protocol will ultimately overall help us determine cost effectiveness. So this is still yet to be determined. Most of the rules are still on the table, like the ones that we've weeded out are again, definitely rules that we see stewardship foresters implementing and making sure are being followed. Okay, next slide. Sorry about that, Emily. Okay, so long-term compliance monitoring study design. So right now we're in the initial assessment. Majority of rules, like I said, are still on the table. We will then take our input that we have, and again, we are tracking all of this information. We will share it with Mount Hood Environmental, and we will collectively develop a study design and study design alternatives. Now, one example is we might choose to do 1 year where we just do all water protection rules, and then the next year road rules, and then the third year go back to water protection rules. Or we make clustered rules where we have road and water protection and steep slopes all being looked at in 1 year. So again, we're not quite sure of the study design, but when we do come up with the study design alternatives, we will bring that to the compliance monitoring committee for feedback. Then once a study design is selected, MHE and ODF will work together on the protocol. We'll work together on the QA/QC protocol, the quality control, and then we will do field testing. So we'll take that protocol and do the field testing. Everything that I just talked about, we're going to start. We started the bullet point 1, our first bullet point, but this June and July is when we're going to start having all these conversations and identify protocols. So for between now and then, as you see the last bullet point, the initial long-term study design begins in 2025. Why that is that we need 1 full year of ferns, the e-notification system where we have completed notifications. So at 12/30/2024, we will, that closes out. And so in 2025, we can then look back at that prior year and see, okay, for all the activities for which we want to assess compliance, pull that population of completed notifications, Then, of course, do random sampling to select the subpopulation that we're going to measure compliance, and then move forward on that. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, but this kind of helps give you an idea of the process that we are going to go through. Next steps, or sorry, next slide. Questions?
Okay, Seth and then Casey.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to point out that some of those road rules, such as the disconnected hydrologically, are going to be rolled up in FRIA, right? And so there will be a schedule for when certain things will happen. And so just wanted to point out that there's a slight nuance, if not potential complication, to some of those rules. Of course, you can look at completed projects, but looking at an entire area for such a thing as disconnection is going to be more of a FRIA question, I think, and we'll have to think our way through what is the compliance monitoring component to that. But I completely agree with you that there's a part of these rules that are far more on the front end, lend themselves to front end compliance and not back end compliance monitoring, such as, you know, the first rule you pointed out. And I think both are extremely important. In fact, I would argue that the first is the most important, is the stewardship forester ability to comply, you know, things like what's happening on the day or week of construction. But sometimes those things don't lend themselves really well to compliance monitoring 2 years after the fact. So anyway, just a couple of points for consideration.
And with regards to the FRIA, you're correct. We could have one of the questions: did they submit their FRIA pre-report? You know, are they doing their annual report? So there are rules that will address FRIA, but you're correct that kind of large landowners with the FRIA, the Forest Road Inventory Assessments, are going to have their whole kind of check when they're dealing with the FRIA coordinator. So that's a whole other process, but you are correct. There's kind of a secondary for that. Casey?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. It's actually Seth actually added pretty much everything I was going to say. So I just wanted to note that there were lots of options for the road specific disconnection from hydrologic sources. So thank you. Thanks,
Yes.
Seth.
And then I know Josh Seeds is on here. Since I mentioned that I do the TMDL reporting, we will also be tracking those activities and stewardship and forester inspections, like the number of inspections and stuff. So there are other avenues in which it may not be compliance monitoring, but it is monitoring that we'll be conducting with these rules. Is it Megan or Seth?
It's me.
Okay.
Thanks, Rebecca. That was very thorough and I think helped lay out sort of the direction the department's heading in. I can tell that you are being very thoughtful and deliberate in how you're developing this process and creating the initial review questions. Is there any chance as you work through that documentation that you can provide us with the report that you're developing or additional information beyond what was just in the slides?
It most likely will be an appendix to the compliance monitoring study design.
And is that something that the compliance monitoring committee will get to also provide feedback on before it's completed?
Most likely, yes. That's why we have you here, so thank you. Yeah. And Seth, did Seth have a question?
Nope, it was a legacy hand raise. I lowered it, so thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, great. Thank you. And oh wait, Amanda.
Yeah, I just put it up. Sorry. So I have on my other screen the charter, which I know we're going to go through. So just, you know, in here, it specifically sounds like you're asking for us to help provide a process for formal feedback. So I know we won't be able to solve that probably in today's meeting, but it sounds like based on Megan's question and kind of my question before, and I'm sure everybody on this in this group is kind of wondering, what that process will look like. So, didn't have it really fully fleshed out, I think, in that slide that you presented here. But is that something that, as we go through the charter and then maybe in follow-up, you're going to want us to provide kind of some ideas there?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
definitely. And when we get like the alternatives from MHE, we will present those alternatives and get feedback. So definitely there, and again, we want to have a formal process. So should we go? I'll go
Yeah,
ahead and
let's-
pass back to
Yep.
Kate.
Okay, I will take the baton. Thanks, everybody. This hour has been really helpful and your feedback has really given us a lot to think about and consider as we move forward with these programs. And we look forward to sharing more of it with you as it develops. Before we move on to take a look at the charter, let's take a 10-minute break. Before we start working with the charter, we had folks trickle in and I wanted to give them a chance to arrive. So we will take attendance real quick and then we will come back and work on the charter. So if everybody, it is currently 11:02. So if we could reconvene at about 11:12, that would be fantastic. I will see everybody then. Okay, folks, it is 11:12. Let's go ahead and reconvene. If you could please turn your camera on or raise your hand so that we know that you are back, that would be helpful. We're not running off without anybody. Okay, we got some thumbs up. Let's see. Got a couple people who do not appear to be back yet. If you could either give us a thumbs up, raise your hand, turn your camera on, whatever makes you happy so that we can tell that you are at the other end of the internet, that would be great. Okie doke. Looks like we are, Josh, are you back, Josh Seeds? Are you back, Megan Tuttle? No, Seth is here. Eric, have you made it back yet? Thank you, Terry. Thank you, everybody who's raised your hand. Okay, awesome. We're gonna go ahead and Emily, if you could move to the next slide, please. Which is kind of a placeholder, but we had folks kind of rolling in through the early phase of the meeting, and I want to make sure we capture everybody who's here. So if we could take attendance real quick, and if you could just acknowledge that you are present online, that would be great. I'm going to run through this in the order that's up on my screen, so it may not reflect what you see, but I will go ahead and kick it off. Kate Thompson, ODF present online, and then the next person I see is Josh Seeds. Josh does not appear to be back yet, and we are gonna, in the interest of time, we are gonna have to move on. So Rebecca? Oh, we got you, Josh. Josh, if you wouldn't mind just stating that you're present. We're taking a quick attendance because we had some folks that rolled in as the meeting was already going on.
Okay, yeah, I'm present. I've been here all along.
Okay, thanks, Josh. And Rebecca? Present. Amanda?
Amanda Sullivan Astor, Associated Oregon Loggers, present by video.
Awesome. And Seth? Seth, are you back?
Sorry, trying to get to my mute button. Yes,
Sorry.
I am here.
Awesome, thank you. Emily?
Present.
Emily Martin, present online.
Yeah, present online.
Elise?
Present online.
Okay, and Rick?
Present online.
Okay, that's Rick's in. And oh no, everything's rearranging and I'm gonna get messed up here. And excuse me, David.
David Showalter online.
Okay, Stephen Fitzgerald, because I know we have more than one Stephen.
Stephen Fitzgerald online.
Okay, John Hawksworth.
I don't know why that space bar didn't work right. John Hawksworth, present online.
The joys of computers. Steve Vaught.
Steve Vaught, present online.
Thank you. Casey.
Casey Kula, present online.
Stephen Koski.
Stephen Koski, present online.
Emily Bose. Oh, we have two Emilys too. This is awesome.
Emily Bose, present online.
Okay, and Terry. Okay, and Eric.
Present online.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and that should be, that's everybody I see. So thank you for that. We are going to move on, and we sent you about a week ago a draft of the CMPC charter with some areas highlighted that we wanted to put to the group to make sure that we were capturing your input on those portions of the charter. So Emily, if you could scroll down to that first highlighted bit here, what we're going to do is take this line by line and get everybody's input and capture it in real time. And then discuss each of these points as we go to it. We may not be able to get through the whole thing today. We'll find out. just as we go. If everybody's happy with something, then we'll just move along. And if not, we'll have some conversations and we'll work out the language to everybody's satisfaction and try to get to a point of consensus on those issues. So the first
And thank
section, yes.
Just real quick, thank you to those who submitted comments as well. So
Yes, we received a couple of comments in advance and we appreciate that you've put that time and thought into it, and the same with all of the group who's here in the meeting today, who's commenting in the moment. So the first section is the member commitments, which is that the CMP committee members, ODF staff, and participants will participate in good faith. Are there, if you could raise your hands, if there's a change you would like to see there. If you don't raise your hand, we will assume that it is acceptable language to you. I'll give everybody a few seconds to deal with the vagaries of computers.
it's like Megan has her hand raised.
Yes, Megan.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Why are we limiting comments from participants to section D? Can you explain that?
This was a conversation that we had with management about what bits of the charter were up for discussion. We don't have the kind of extensive mandate that say an AMPC or or a committee like that that's a decision-making body would have. As this is an advisory committee, some of that language is just flat out boilerplate, and it's something that's used pretty standard across ODF committees. And so these are the places where the committee gets to decide how the committee does its business. SIMC, Casey asked if we can pronounce CMPC SIMC. Yeah, I think we need to find a catchy way to discuss that. So that was where that decision came into place, is that some of this is standard for ODF committees, but because as a group, we want to make sure that we're operating in a way that works for everybody. Those are the pieces that we wanted to put up for discussion.
And that would be fine if this charter did use standard language, but there are several places where the purpose and objectives and goals don't match either the language in the PFA report and compliance monitoring or the language that's in rule.
Okay, I can't speak directly to the PFA report right now, but I can speak to the language in rule. This was a discussion that we had with our basically our internal policy analyst who is responsible for rules. We had suggested some rule language that is as an update that ended up not being included in the spring cleaning because it was outside the scope. But one of the concerns that we had about that language was that there were some issues with the way that our tribal partners were portrayed. And there was some language included that may not be acceptable to those tribal partners. And so we worked to find some language that was more suitable and acceptable to them, so that tribes, for example, is capitalized, and that if they were to give input, that it would be accepted as a those are considered government to government communications. And so making sure that we're acknowledging that through our choice of language.
And Kate, can I provide a little bit?
I'm
Sure,
not
Rebecca.
talking about capitalizations or government to government language here. I'm talking about things like purpose of scope
So,
and fundamentally understanding the goals and objectives that were written into the rule.
Okay, Rebecca.
Yeah, and Megan, I totally understand where you're coming from. Because we kind of convened the committee before the new rules go into effect. This kind of right now has to cover both existing rules and then the new rules. And so I would encourage that when the new rules go into effect, that we consider adjusting the charter.
Agreed. This is a living document, and so so we're working under current rule. This has been a pretty informal arrangement, and so we're trying to set some starting point in order to work forward, and then this can be revisited at any time.
And I think that, Megan, that was a really good point, and we definitely want
Yes.
to address that.
Yes, thank you for that.
Is there any way, Kate, you could provide a crosswalk here on the differences and which ones are government to government versus where ODF decided to go in a different direction than the rule in the PFA report?
Okay, for the government to government is only in direct references to tribes. And I will admit, as I'm mostly here to facilitate, and this has been Emily Martin's project. Some of you haven't met Emily before. She did some of the initial outreach for this because she's been on maternity leave and she has just come back. But Emily's been doing a lot of the work on this. And Emily, if you'd like to address some of those choices and how this was modeled and developed, because the rule, I will state this, that the new rule is pretty broad as far as there will be a committee, here's who's on the committee is the upshot. And David, if you wouldn't mind, since you've been so kindly looking up rules, I believe it's in 0104 or thereabouts, pulling up the language that's in the new rules. So it's pretty broad about there will be a committee and, to advise ODF. And, and so the specific language, and I'm working on my laptop here, so I can't switch windows, and I'm going to leave this up to David, is pretty generalized. Previously, this committee existed, but it was really an informal body that we assembled together to obtain feedback, and it wasn't established in rule, is my understanding of it. And so, so we're trying to formalize processes a little bit, and that's something that we're gradually trying to develop. And the long-term idea with something like this is that as membership changes, it will provide for a more seamless understanding for the new folks coming in about how we operate, how we communicate with each other. So Emily, I'm not sure if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, just specifically for the under the scope and charge, if you're curious about the government to government language, all that we really changed is we removed the use of the term stakeholder, because stakeholder makes it sound like lower level than government to government. It's something that's frowned upon in regards to using with our tribal partners. And again, the whole thing with it just said tribes before lowercase. Tribes are supposed to be capitalized because they are sovereign nations. It's something about being respectful. We're trying to improve our relations with our tribal partners. So that's what's going on there. And then as far as background for rule language with the goals of the CMPC, or the CMPC, okay, yeah, anyway, CMP. This language was taken directly out of the rules. The only difference is we made it into 2 bullet points, and I think there's an extra and a period, just so that it's easier to read because of bullet points. Most of the language that we call boilerplate have actually been used in AMC, and also the previous version of this this more informal version of this committee. So it is language that has been used in the past for committee charters by ODF.
One possible suggestion is that we keep this a draft until January, like a working draft until January 1, because we are trying to be in existing rules and future rules, which it can be very confusing, and it would be nice at one point to be able to just convert all to the new effort. So I don't know if folks can weigh in on that, if we want to keep this as a draft until then, or how we want to go about that, so that we can have it more clearly represent what, like Megan said, the private forest accord report.
And be more forward looking. And I would agree with Rebecca if everybody else would be willing to take that under consideration, because one of the challenges that we really are facing as a program right now is that we've got our feet in both sets of rules, and we're trying to find a balance. So I'd be interested in folks' input on that.
Feel free to email us input on that if we don't
Yes,
come
if
up
you'd
with a
like.
decision. But it looks like we have Casey and Amanda. I don't know who was first. The question.
Yeah, I just wanted to first make sure that if Megan had follow-up, but primarily I'm just speaking up because I agree with Megan. I'd like to make sure that it matches the PFA. So it's primarily backing up, but Megan, do you still have comments? You're unmuted.
Go for it.
No,
I can
I
send
wanted you to
the
say
actual
something.
PFA and rulemaking language in a draft format. So that's not a problem. I'll do that, Rebecca. I appreciate you agreeing to work with us on this, and fully support updating the government to government changes with the tribes if it's related to things like stakeholders and capitalization, and does not change the intent like the language here did.
Casey, did you have anything else?
No, I just wanted to make sure that you knew that I was backing her up on that. So
Okay.
if there was some need to move forward, but I'm good with a draft until we're fully into new rule land.
Thank you. Amanda?
Yeah, I guess kind of following along what Megan noted, you know, I recognize that the AMPC stuff, you know, is effective or was effective as of November 15th, 2022. That's the effective date. And so I recognize that the effective date in the rule revision document for this kind of more formal body is January 1 of 2024. But I would feel comfortable including in the charter a recognition of the specific language in the rules that have been approved by the board, although don't go into effect until January 1st, recognizing, you know, the true intent of this group. So I guess just to put it on the record, I would feel more comfortable if the charter recognized that in its purpose and scope.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for that, Amanda. And this is a draft at this point. This is not set in stone. So if you do have input on the portions that aren't highlighted, those were what we had, you know, teed up for conversation. But if you have further conversation outside of that, we would like to hear that as well. These are definitely things that we can put into changes. And this will be, you know, an ongoing process for a while until we can all settle on something that we're happy with. So if there are other places that you've identified that you'd like us to pay attention to, we'd really like to know about them so that we can make sure that everybody's working with something that they're satisfied with.
Really quick, Amanda, you put in a chat. Do you want to add anything to that? Or is that just one of the things you want to have included?
Well, that's just the specific language as far as the creation of this group in a more formal capacity. I think referencing rule is important for a document like this. So just wanted to highlight that. I see Rick has got his hand up. I've got one other comment on the highlighted section, but I'll let Rick go.
Real quick, just before we get to that, the only change to that was the change from removing stakeholder and changing to tribal partners instead of tribes. That is something that we have agreed to change internally because of tribal relations. So really that's the only change to that language. It has not changed the charge of this group other than just improving our tribal relations. So we'll probably keep it to that wording for that reason.
Okay, and just so that everybody knows, if you see me looking down, it's because I'm taking notes, because these are things that we want to follow up on.
Should we go ahead and go to Rick?
Yep.
Yeah, thanks. I'm new to this committee in the process, and I would just like a little bit more background and context on the consensus, especially number 12. That if this is boilerplate and it's used, you know, across the committees, that's great. But I'd like to hear a little bit more about what that really means.
That's one of the things that we want to discuss with everybody. There are a lot of different models as far as reaching consensus, defining what consensus means. So it may be 100% consensus, it may be 50% plus one. And there are different ways we can go about that. So when we get to that particular item, that's something that we want to open up to conversation. I have a few suggestions about that. I know Emily's had a few ideas about that as well. And so that's something that we want to discuss, because I'm sure that other folks here have had some experiences and developed some, learned some lessons and may have some really excellent suggestions we'd like to hear as well. Okay.
Stephen?
I wasn't sure if this, were you, for clarification, are you going to go through 1 through 13? Is that what we're going to do? I have a 14 to add, but I didn't know
Awesome.
how you want to do this.
Okay, we were hoping to go 1 through 13, but we can, and then when we get past 13, which we may not do today, we may circle back on in our next meeting. Then we can capture that 14 before we end today, so that you don't have to try to remember it over a series of meetings. So
Okay, then I'll hold off until.
okay, so let's see where we are on time, and we'll make sure that we capture that before we conclude today. And then Seth, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'm gonna go off of what Rick is saying, was discussing in consensus. Can you clarify, is this a steering committee or an advisory committee? Like what's the role? Are we making decisions with this body, or are we giving recommendations? And if it's the latter, then does it make sense to have a consensus on a recommendation when you can hear multiple? I mean, you could get recommendations from, I don't know, I just
Right. Okay.
seems
That is a
off.
point I can clear up, Seth. For a lot of the topics we're bringing up, we do want to hear this diversity of voices, experiences, opinions, and it has incredible value to us as we stand this program up. So in that sense, yes, it is an advisory committee, but for example, even just discussing this charter, there may be places that we don't have agreement. So when we're dealing with more administrative topics, as far as the committee and how it runs and that sort of thing, we'd really like this to be a collaborative process. But there may be times where we, need to stop and say, okay, we're not at 100% agreement that we go forward this way, but is this something everyone can live with? And those are the kinds of questions where we do need to reach consensus, or are really more around the administrative side of how this committee runs.
So you're saying the committee does have decision-making authority then?
About itself, yes. It's sort of circular, isn't it? In terms of this charter, yes, the committee has decision-making authority.
Okay.
Amanda? Sorry. Go
Okay.
ahead, Seth.
I would challenge to think about that a little bit. I mean, in terms of us giving thoughts on the charter, I mean, I guess that's fine, and we can come to consensus on the charter itself. But in terms of the work of this group, it seems to me to make more sense to have this group be an advisory, and I think that was the idea. In which case, I'm not sure and I look, I'm not trying to say we should all fight all the time. That's not what I'm getting at all. I'm just stating that perhaps that sentence in this charter may not make sense in terms of directing us towards decisions that will be made via consensus, when in reality, the work of this group is not necessarily to make decisions.
Okay, let's table that until we get to that line item, and we can discuss it further, whether we even need that in there, since we're kind of coming to consensus about what it looks like at the time. That's a great conversation to have, and you make a very good point.
Yeah, so that's under scope and charge. If you see the part that I just highlighted.
Amanda.
Yeah,
Amanda.
yeah, if Emily wants to finish her sentence, that's fine.
Yeah, sorry. I was just saying, yeah, this group is not a decision-making body when it comes to what we're doing with the compliance monitoring program. But it's really beneficial having feedback because you all come from different areas, and having you is going to improve this program immensely. But I just wanted to point out that is specified in the scope and charge.
Yeah, so it's funny. My colleagues, I work with all these people all the time, right? So we're all colleagues. And when I let Rick go, he kind of stole the words right out of my mouth. I was going to comment on number 12, but I think in general, we could probably delete 10 from my perspective. I think we could delete 10 through 12. I would agree with Seth. I think that this body is really here to provide you guys with comments and perspectives to help make decisions as ODF staff. I mean, the rule specifically says that this program is managed by ODF. And so, at the end of the day, these are your guys' decisions to make. You're just coming to us as experts in the field to help guide decisions. And we don't have to agree. None of us have to agree at any point. And so I think, to me, it's unreasonable to think that we need to have a formal process to come to consensus. Because I don't think that we're going to be voting. We don't even have a chairperson. So, I think this is a lot more informal compared to a lot of the other committees and groups that advise ODF on programs, because of the fact that, it states that you guys are to be, the ultimate decider for these things. So I would suggest kind of removing those 3 just from my personal experience and just by the way that I interpret and review the rules.
Okay, since
all the other ones.
Okay, great.
For the most part.
Since we're here discussing 10 through 12, does anybody else have any thoughts on that, or is everybody happy with removing those 3 items?
I'm happy with removing them, because I think it's, you want to take the diversity of comments and perspective. We may not all agree or agree it to the same on every aspect. So I'm okay with that.
Okay, does anybody have any objection to that? And feel free to just open your mic and speak. I'm going to just leave it blank. And Emily, if you could just highlight those and go to the home and just strike them through, or do that and track changes either way, so that folks can see what we're doing. Okay, awesome.
Yeah, Kate, this is Casey. I agree.
Okay.
You want to hear from as many of us and as many diverse points of view for the feedback for this program, as far as I understand it. So
correct.
I'm there.
Okay. Super. So let's hit the rest of these points one by one. Thanks everyone, by the way, for coming and prepared. It's really helped move this along. In terms of keeping the conversation going, I think we all agree that we want to participate in good faith. I suppose if anybody has objections and would like to participate in bad faith, now is the time to say so. But there's an expectation of regular two-way communication, that channels stay open between members and who they represent to ensure meaningful representation of those interests, which means that we expect that folks will be taking the information they learned in this committee meeting and passing it along to their constituent groups. And, gathering any information from those that you may wish to bring into this meeting. Does anybody have any wordsmithing they'd like us to do, or are people satisfied with that language? Sounds like, okay, silence. I'm going to take silence as approval here. Number 2 is prepare for and set aside times for the meetings and the entire process. I'm not hearing anything there. And if Rebecca, or if you could keep an eye on the hand raises, because I can't see them all, I would really appreciate it, just so that we can make sure tracking. And folks, you're also welcome. And if there's an uncomfortable silence, feel free to open your mic and speak up if it looks like you have, if you feel like you have something to say and there's a space to say it. This is a time to be having that kind of conversation.
I had a question. Would the committee like a copy of the rules relating to compliance monitoring, so 678, or does everyone have that accessible? Or does nobody care?
I mean, if you want to forward them to the committee, I'd take another copy of it. I have a copy, but
Sounds good. I
I'm
was
sure
going to
others
drop it
might
in the,
not.
I was going to drop it in the chat, but that doesn't seem possible here on Zoom. So we
We
will,
can- we
we'll
can
send it as
send-
an email. Yeah.
It's on the ODF website under the private forest accord revised
Right.
rules on the right side.
But we can send
So I
everybody a direct link to that. And thank you, Amanda, for dropping that in chat.
I was going to add, for what it's worth, I mean, having a number 2 here that basically kind of mandates everyone to set aside time for the entire process, quote unquote, the entire process. I'm not quite sure what quote the entire process means. I think it maybe a better wording would be prepare for and allow time for the meetings and adequate time for participation. I mean, I wouldn't want to scold somebody for, having a lot of things on their plate.
Absolutely.
But
Does anybody else have any suggestions around this one?
I think we could, just strike through the entire process part. I don't think we need too much more than that.
Okay. Is everybody content with what they see on the screen here? Are there any other changes they'd like to see? Okay, moving along. Sorry. go ahead.
are you asking for feedback on the rest of what's in front of us, or are you going to continue to go line by line?
We're going to continue to go line by line just to make
All right,
sure if
then-
anybody hasn't given specific feedback on particular items yet, that they have a chance to speak up about it.
All right.
Okay, so participate fully, honestly, and fairly, commenting constructively and specifically, which I might add everybody's been doing an excellent job with. Much appreciated. Is there anything anybody'd like to add in here or change?
Hey, what do you mean by fairly? What's an example of fairly participating?
To me, fairly participating means, and this isn't something that's happened in these meetings, but that you're giving other people equal time, that everybody's got an opportunity to say their piece within the meeting, and that it's not being dominated by an hour-long exegesis about something not related. So we could definitely clarify what fairly means. I'd be interested in other people might suggest here as well.
How is that different than number 4?
So we could delete fairly in this case, because we are repeating ourselves.
Mhm.
Would that work for everyone?
Or
Say-
strike
Yeah,
4?
Okay, either
Either
one.
way,
I like keeping 4 out separately as a reminder.
Yeah, agreed. I like 4.
So with 3, would
And
everybody have?
fairly has a broader, this is Josh, fairly has a broader meaning, in addition to letting other people have a chance. I mean, it can include, not making negative assumptions. It can include allowing room for other people's points of view, and so on and so forth. I mean, so I actually like the fairly terminology. I mean, I can go get my old dictionary if to clarify things, but I mean, for me, it involves not making assumptions about others. It involves, allowing room for a broad range of opinions, allowing for the possibility you might be wrong, for example. So there's a lot there. I actually like the original wording on both 3 and 4.
All right, so let's look at 3, 4, and 5 as a kind of a set of ideas, because they do all relate to each other. We've got this idea that everybody's coming in, participating fully and honestly, being constructive and specific, that everybody is saying their piece and that we're taking turns and that everybody has a chance to say what they have to say, and allowing people to say what's true to them without fear of reprisal. And I know we've gotten some feedback in email specifically about those, but those three as a unit, do folks feel that captures kind of the environment we want to have this meeting in and how we want to treat each other within the meeting? Are there pieces that we are missing or that we could improve upon or update to capture that sense better?
You might take 5 and add it to the end of 3.
Okay.
Because if you participate fully, honestly, commenting constructively and specifically, then you want to allow people to speak the truth as they see it without fear of. So when they do, when they participate in the first part of that sentence, the second one just the second sentence just says, I don't want to have someone jump down my throat because they didn't like what I said.
Fair enough.
Does that look good, the way I rephrased it?
That would be adding 5 and kind of combining 5 and 3, what Emily has here on the screen. We'll worry about the numbering later. Does
Josh,
anybody
is your hand still up, Josh?
Yeah, I've got my hand up. Yeah, I have a bit of a delay because of satellite internet, so I'm sometimes, reluctant to just jump in. Because then I end up talking over others. I think I commented on this and sending in written comments, but the language allowing people to say what is true for them, something about that just I don't like the way that sounds, because it's really more about letting someone speak their mind, or saying what they think, saying what is true for them. I don't know, there's something about that. If what's true for someone is it's in defiance of physical facts, like I don't know, that's just that kind of strikes me strangely. So I really rather have
they could speak their opinion,
speak their mind, speak their opinion, say what they think.
Yeah, I agree. I'm so glad you said that, Josh. It makes me feel like I'm not alone here. I just
no.
So
okay,
totally,
I'm glad I'm not the only
support
one.
that.
Yeah, to voice their opinion, voice their view, speak their, something like that. Yeah, I don't know. Then you start, it just seems to kind of load things up to have a philosophical conversation about what really is truth. And I don't want, I'd love to have that conversation outside of work. I don't want to do it here.
Yeah, Josh, I was going to say the same thing, because it almost then turns it into like a values proposition versus this is a very technical, scientific body. I mean, we're talking about compliance monitoring, we're talking about statistics. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
okay, so
that's a good way to put it, Amanda.
Okay. Emily's made some updates here. Let's that changes that language. Is everybody, and she's highlighted the change she made. Is everybody happy with what she has, or are there any other suggestions that might capture that capture these concerns?
Yeah, I would say voice their thoughts, because someone might want to express fact, opinion, or a mix of the two. So I would say something along the lines of thoughts. I like that.
And I'm willing to go wherever the group goes here. I agree with all of the sentiment that this embodies, and that people have a chance to voice their thoughts, and that people are respectful. All of that as a general sentiment is totally great. I'm on board. with this idea that without fear of reprisal almost kind of makes it sound like in other places we're beating people up, but here we're not going to. I just, it puts it in a negative tone. Where has there been reprisal? I don't know.
So
That
if
one
we,
kind of stuck out to me.
okay, if we stop the sentence with "to voice their thoughts," period, and just left it there, would that be satisfactory for everybody?
It would be for me, but I'll stop and let everybody else.
Is there anybody that would object to that change?
It looks like Amanda, were
Part of
you?
allowing,
Go ahead, Josh.
okay. Yeah, I think it works because part of allowing people to voice their thoughts is not immediately jumping down their throat and, giving them kind of fear or trepidation about speaking their mind in the future. So to Seth's point about sort of assuming a negative, I think the meaning doesn't change. It's just, you cut a little shorter, conciseness is good here, and then it doesn't have that, negative connotation. It's more affirmative than negative.
Okay, and Amanda, you had something to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm comfortable with deleting that, especially when you pair it with the next one that starts with "speak respectfully." That would mean that your response to somebody should be respectful, right? And we're expecting that.
Okay, so those tie together better as we have it right now. Would that be?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fear of, I wasn't as concerned about the fear of reprisal, but I can see how it almost implies that we have to include that because there's other places that's not being applied. So I'm comfortable with this.
Okay. Is there anybody else who would like to see a change, or if I hear silence for a few seconds here, we can go ahead.
This is
move on.
Casey. I was trying to jump in earlier, but I got confused for Josh, and I'm totally fine with that, Amanda. I think that there should be some way to connect voicing one's thoughts to the responses from other members of SIMPSI. Do you see that, Emily? I got SIMPSI. And so if there's another way of saying without fear of reprisal, but I think that the goal of that, the phrase that was included, is to make sure that in these meetings, people feel comfortable speaking their minds in respectful manners, but without having people jump on them. And I know that I'm like looking at the list of folks. I don't actually know who everybody works with here, but I know that in some spaces people are uncomfortable when they're the sole conservation voice, and they might fear reprisal in the meeting, being uncomfortable to state something that's different than the group's general consensus in that moment. So if there's a way to suggest that in the meeting, we agree to be careful in how we respond to somebody who's speaking their opinion, then I think that's great. But I definitely recognize Seth and then Amanda's comments about like, wait, is there a fear of reprisal in other meetings? So we should be careful in this one. So I'm done.
What do you think of what I just changed?
Emily, to get at Casey's, Casey, tell me if I'm off base here, and maybe if this goes against what your thoughts are too, Seth, or Fitz or whatever, but maybe in a manner that allows people to comfortably voice their thoughts. Oh man, I just had something. Comfortably voice their thoughts. Now I forgot it. So go ahead, Casey. It'll come back to me.
Oh, I don't, I'm like a white guy who's used to being the one in the minority in my commissioner role. So for me, I'm like, whatever about comfort, but maybe for some other people, it is like, I'm comfortable voicing my opinion. So if it's still a reference, instead of fear of reprisal, it's comfortable speaking your opinion, then I'm good with that. Thanks.
I got it back. So light bulb moment. Comfortably voice their thoughts when they may be different than others. Maybe something like that, to that extent. Would kind of get at
I
that.
think it gets to the goal.
Okay, so the whole phrase would be to comfortably voice their thoughts when they may be different from others. Is that correct?
I think that's more like plain speak than what we had
Okay.
before, so.
And plain is often better.
Do we need to have the word honestly? Maybe I'm just assuming that's a given, but I don't know. It's what nobody said anything, but I just was looking at it.
Does anybody have any objections to that?
Okay, I guess we'll leave it in.
Okay, and it looks like we're running out of time here, and we do want this to be an ongoing conversation. So just as a quick recap, we will be, once we have access, we will be sending out information about training for the committee, which has, when you join this kind of committee, I think many of you know, but just so that we're putting it out there, there are certain responsibilities that you have because you do become a public official, and we want to make sure that you have that information so there's no ambiguity about it. But we're just waiting for the computer access for that, and we'll get that to you as soon as we have it. So keep an eye out for that email. The last estimate I heard was mid-June. So it should be sometime around then. But what we can do is send you what we have that we've worked on today, and set another meeting here so that we can continue this conversation. So we'll be reaching out to everybody and working out the schedule for the next meeting. Because Adam's not here and we need to coordinate with his schedule, we will need to get with him, so we can't immediately give you a date right now, but we will get back to you as soon as we can on that. And in the meantime, we will be taking all of your input today under consideration, and we should have some updates for you in the relatively near future about what's going on with the reforestation study and MHE and all the information we're getting there.
I do have a comment I want to get on before I forget. So
You
it
bet.
relates to what I mentioned. So this would be a new number.
Oh, yes, please.
And I wouldn't have thought of this, but it's been used against me. So or to the college, but something to the effect that members cannot use their affiliation in this committee to insert themselves into related issues beyond their assignment here. It's happened from one of your other committees, and this could be a boilerplate for all your committees. That is, because I'm on this committee, that doesn't give me any authority to comment or to write letters related to this issue, or to contact, say a landowner here and say, I think you're not in compliance.
Okay, that's a very good point. Thank you for bringing that up. And real
Did I
quick,
capture that okay?
yeah,
Sorry, just real fast.
okay, and then Megan, we'll get to you in just a second here.
Yeah, that's good for now. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. We can discuss this in our next meeting. And Megan, the revised rules status, we really only had that one little update to the rules in terms of the spring cleanup, which was to update harvesting on steep slopes, as Rebecca mentioned it. And the rest of that conversation revolved around the rule selection process that Rebecca discussed with us today.
And just for everybody, I was told by Nicole at ODF that the revised spring cleanup rule revisions will be available to the public sometime after May 24th. And so we can share that link with you so you can see the small changes that will be presented to the board in June.
Yep, and a lot of these were housekeeping that spoke to technical issues and making sure that references were correct and that sort of thing. So there's not anything sweeping or vast, but there are things that will help us to stay close to the PFA report and to make sure that these are things that can be implemented out in the field. So I want to thank everybody for your time today and really appreciate everything you brought to the table. Look forward to more of these conversations, and we will send you information and updates as soon as they become available, and we will send our work today out to you today.
Hey, I didn't know if you didn't see my hand up, but
Oh, I did not. Thank you.
just really quick. I know that we're over time here by a few minutes, but I assume that you guys will be sending out some sort of doodle poll. We didn't talk about meeting frequency, so not sure what to expect moving forward with that. And then following on the DAS kind of workday stuff, if we have a workday account, should we send you that account number?
If you're in DAS Workday, we should be able to find you.
Okay, because I'm on another
right up.
council and I already had an account through my registered lobbyist, and I already did all the trainings I needed to do there, and then I got another one assigned to me, so now I have two. So I had to try to combine the two through DAS. It was a friggin' nightmare, so I don't want another one.
Oh, absolutely not. And the other thing I want to find out is if you've already completed this training recently, do you need to do it again? And
we shouldn't have to.
I would imagine that you don't have to, but I want to make sure that we don't have you guys repeating things 1,000 times too, and that we're using that, we're allowing you to use your time well. So I'll look into that. So we will follow up with all those things. We will keep an eye out for folks' Workday account as this outside access becomes available through DAS. So that's going to take a little doing, and we're kind of dependent on their schedule as far as that goes. But we will send out a doodle poll for the next meeting, and we do need to connect with Adam Coble first because he's not available this week, and so we do need to get with him before we can send that out to make sure that it aligns with his schedule as well as ours. So thank you again, everybody, for all of your time, all of your input, all of these really great conversations, and I really look forward to having more of them.
Yeah, thanks all.
Okay, thank you.